In 2003, this hiker opened up his camcorder and recorded his final message to his family. After he wiped tears away from his eyes, he closed the camcorder and he grabbed his water bottle, but he questioned whether he should even drink the murky liquid that was inside of it. And then, with fear in his heart, he grabbed his pocket knife. Oh, and before I go on, I should mention that the hiker was doing all of this with just one hand. Folks, do I have a story for you today? This one's absolutely insane. It's a true man against wilderness type of situation. It's a tale that's almost too unbelievable to be true, with a physical and mental toll that I'm just gonna be honest is shocking to hear about at some points. In fact, there's actually a decent chance that you've already heard about this story because there's a pretty popular movie that was made about it, but I'm gonna let you figure that out as we go. It'll be a fun little game. And also, let's just say that the movie may not be the most accurate telling of this story out there because what actually happened is crazier than anything that Hollywood could have possibly made up. So without further ado, let's go back in time together to the 1980s, where we're gonna meet a boy named Aron. Now, as a kid, the mountains of Aron's home state of Colorado, or is it Colorado? I don't know. These mountains really called to him. And by the way, this wasn't just a casual interest. This is something I can relate to as someone who grew up in mountains, in Vermont. This was a deep ingrained passion. This kid, Aron, routinely hiked alone, skied alone, climbed alone, and basically pushed the limits of what a young person should probably be doing in the wilderness all by themselves. But Aron was just, from a young age, obsessed with taking on all of the challenges that the great outdoors provided. And so, I'm sure some people tried, but ultimately no one was gonna tell him no. And you have to understand that Aron wasn't just this outdoor badass. He was much more than that. He was low-key kind of a genius. He went on to be an engineering major at Carnegie Mellon, and with that kind of degree, he obviously could have made tons of money and had a great career in a bigger city, right? But Aron ended up staying true to himself after graduating, and he moved to Aspen, Colorado, where he worked at a local gear shop. And of course, he was hiking in the mountains, just doing mountain stuff all the time. And while he did have a solid group of friends to go out on the trails with, there weren't many people who could really match how bold of an outdoorsman Aron was. He was always willing to go the extra mile. And so that often meant that he was out there on his own, sleeping outside, battling the elements without anyone else to help him. And so even though he did end up taking a job as an engineer, he had already earned the reputation of being someone who could really handle his own out there. And up until April of 2003, nothing had really gone wrong in any of his daring adventures. But before we fast forward to April of 2003, I want to stop just briefly at a snapshot of Aron's life in January of 2003. Aron had actually quit his job as an engineer at this point, and he set out on a goal of climbing all of Colorado's 14ers, which are mountains that go over 4,000 feet in elevation. A lot of people try to bag each peak, peak bagging, it's a thing. A lot of you know what this is, but just in case you didn't, that's what it is. And the reason I want to stop at this point is to tell you that 3 months before the event that I'm going to be talking about shortly, the event that made international headlines and later turned into a movie, Aron and 2 of his buddies actually survived something pretty insane on one of their climbs. That would be a Category 5 avalanche, which I'm not an expert on avalanches, but that's pretty big, right? And the reason I mention this and what's really interesting about it is instead of that experience bringing Aron and his friends closer together, it actually created the opposite effect. Aron's friends were pissed off at him. They felt like Aron was reckless with their safety, like he didn't really care about the risks that he was taking with his life and their lives. And they also claimed that Aron had pressured them into skiing on the mountain when the avalanche conditions and the avalanche risk was basically at its highest. And I guess this beef between them was so bad that those 2 friends stopped talking to Aron. Not just for a few days or for a few months, but forever. They literally never spoke again. And I'm sure this hurt, right? And so at age 27, Aron did some reflecting, something I think we all need to do every now and again. And he swore to himself that he'd try to change his attitude and drop some of his ego. Despite how hurt he was, he wanted to take this experience as a lesson. And so over those next few months, let's just say that, yeah, he did a lot of soul searching. And that's where we found Aron on April 26th, 2003. Since the Avalanche earlier that year, Aron had gone on a few solo adventures to try and clear his head and to just to think about his life, right? And it's important to mention that oftentimes he wouldn't tell anyone where he was going, or hell, he wouldn't even tell people that he was going out at all. He'd basically just leave one morning and, you know, sometimes he'd reappear that night, or he'd reappear after a few days or even a week. And this time, well, it was supposed to be no different. Aron had planned an afternoon solo canyoneering trek in Blue John Canyon, which is a remote slot canyon in southeastern Utah, which is part of the very large and very desolate Canyonlands National Park. His plan for this trip was very simple. He would head out in the morning and he would return home by nightfall. But folks, how do I say this? Aron would not return by nightfall, not even close. And obviously that means something very bad is about to happen. So before we get into all those disturbing details, and trust me, it's bad, let's take a breather for just a moment here while I tell you about Element. So I've never been to the canyon that this story took place in, but I have been to southern Utah. In fact, I'm recording this in that same state. And I actually even went to Canyonlands National Park a couple months ago. And let me tell you, I was getting sweaty. If it wasn't for Element, I probably would have been feeling terrible, to be honest, because I was just sweating so much. And when you sweat, you need to replace your electrolytes. It's gonna help keep you hydrated and just keep your energy levels up. And so when I was down there, I was hammering Element electrolytes. They have so many amazing flavors. And so if you're a hiker or you're just someone who goes to the gym or does yard work, if you're just anyone who sweats a lot, you need to go to drinkelement.com/KyleHatesHiking. That's drinklmt.com/KyleHatesHiking. Go to that link and I'd recommend you buy some citrus salt because that's what I've been drinking a lot right now. And when you make a purchase through my link, you're going to get a sample pack of 8 additional Element flavor sticks thrown in with your order for no extra cost. This sample pack includes all of their most popular flavors. So you're going to get like a good overview of what Element has to offer. And so it's just also a great deal, like a bunch of free Element. One more time, that's drinklmt.com/KyleHatesHiking, or just click the link at the top of the description. Go make a purchase, citrus salt, and yeah, you're gonna get some bonus stuff thrown in as well. All right, so now let's go back to Blue John Canyon. So this wasn't just like a simple hike like I did when I was in Canyonlands. This is canyoneering, which is something I have not done, but it's very popular here in Utah. It's pretty much like a full sport. It's definitely, from my understanding, a level above hiking. You have to be prepared to like scramble, down climb, rappel up, rappel down, and even swim at times. That's what I think anyways. Like I said, I haven't done it, but it's intense, right? And so Aron, with his new approach to risk, he was decked out with all the gear that he thought he needed to be safe. He had ropes, he had a harness, a first aid kit, water, some food, obviously, 2 burritos and some chocolate to be specific. He had headphones, he had a CD player, and he had a camcorder to take some video of the canyon. But that's not all he had. He had one more piece of equipment on him that he would carry pretty much all the time he was out in the wilderness. And that was his trusty multi-tool, equipped with pliers, scissors, and a small knife. One thing he did not have was a cell phone. And I'm pretty sure there was, in 2003 especially, no reception where he was going anyways. And also I was only 7 years old at the time. So did people even have cell phones in 2003? You guys can let me know. Anyways, that morning, the weather in Blue John Canyon was clear. The sky was blue, and Aron began his adventure. He navigated the narrow passages of the canyon, jamming out to rock music playing from his CD player. Hopefully it was Alice in Chains. I love them. And he headed further and further out into this national park. Aron had a pretty good sense of where he was, even though, you know, there was literally no one around him. And of course, going back to cell phones, this was before the days of like easy GPS navigation. I mean, obviously GPSs existed back then. I'm not sure if he had one, but regardless, at one point, Aron laid his eyes on a beautiful slot canyon that he knew he could descend into, and that's what he did. He continued his journey deeper down into this canyon. And at one point, he even wedged his body between two giant canyon walls and started slowly inching down, using the walls for leverage, essentially, which makes me feel claustrophobic just saying that. But on his way down, he came across a large boulder that was wedged between the canyon walls, which is a pretty common obstacle for these kinds of climbs, I guess. And so Aron, with his headphones on still, hopefully listening to Alice in Chains, tried to maneuver around this rock. He placed one hand on the canyon wall and the other on the boulder, but with those headphones on and nutshell or whatever blasting through his ears, maybe he didn't hear that when he put his hands on the boulder, it slightly shifted against the wall. If he had noticed this, Aron would have most likely paused and maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have ended up being the subject of this video. But he didn't notice this. And so he put his weight on the boulder. And in an absolutely horrifying instant, the boulder dislodged, sending it and Aron himself into a free fall of 65 feet, which is about 20 meters. It sent him straight down. And of course, he panicked. He tried grabbing the canyon wall as he fell, but there was nothing that he could reach onto that would slow him down, right? And instead of his hands finding the canyon wall, he would end up hitting the ground. And before he could get up and move so much as his right arm, that falling boulder found it. Well, it actually didn't just find his arm, it pinned his arm against the canyon wall, crushing it from the forearm up to his hand. Now, I want you to stop and imagine this for a second. You survive a fall from the same height as a 7-story building, only to be met with the most excruciating pain that you've ever felt, aka your hand being crushed by an almost half-ton boulder. At first, Aron went into shock and also anger at himself. I mean, he had literally spent the last few months thinking about if he was being too risky in the outdoors, and of course feeling guilty about those lost friendships because of the decisions he'd made and the risks he'd taken in the outdoors. But now he was stuck and he was paying the full price for that risk that he had taken. He was quite literally in a jam. And so Aron made a desperate attempt to try and free his arm, right? He pulled, he twisted, he strained himself and his body in any possible way that he could even think of. But despite all this effort, the boulder did not budge one bit. I mean, his arm was basically part of the rock at this point. It was immovable, and as a result, Aron couldn't move either. And this is when the worst realization of all came in, which of course is that nobody knew where Aron was. Again, it would be one thing if Aron had left his plans with someone and therefore rescuers could zero in on him because they knew where he was going to be hiking, but he hadn't told anyone where he was going. No one was going to be coming for him. Now, if any of this story sounds familiar to some of you, that's because maybe you're starting to recall the famous movie that I mentioned in the beginning of the video. And if you have seen that movie and you do know this story, then, well, you know that things are about to get even worse, if that's even possible, which it is. So Aron quickly began to kind of assess his situation after trying all these things. He's totally alone, he's miles from civilization, and he only has use of one arm, right? Because the other one's pinned. And so any survival tactics that, he needs to do to keep himself alive are now going to just be even more difficult. And it gets worse because he had very limited supplies. Because, as I'm sure you remember, he only packed for an afternoon adventure, right? He didn't have overnight gear with him. And as the sun was beginning to set, Aron knew that the desert nights out in southern Utah can be brutally cold. He didn't have any warm weather gear. He was literally only wearing a t-shirt and shorts. He tried to chip away at the boulder with his multi-tool knife, but that failed to even make a dent on the rock, and it only made his knife duller. He tried to use his ropes and his harness to rig a pulley system to create even a millimeter of space between his arm and the boulder, but again, this was a failure. The boulder was just too big, too heavy, too perfectly wedged onto his arm. And then a very brief, unrealistic idea came through his head. An idea of how he could potentially free himself. A brutal, bloody, unimaginably painful idea. I think you might know where I'm going with this. But let's shake that off. I mean, that would literally be Aron's worst case scenario, right? He wasn't going to resort to that. And so Instead, he opted to just patiently, anxiously wait for a rescue. What else could he possibly do? The first night under the stars, Aron was left with endless thoughts, and of course with the agonizing pain in his right arm and his hand. And so to get his mind off of all this craziness and anxiety, Aron made plans to conserve his 1 liter of water and his food. He started to get strategic. He kept his backpack on to shield himself from the cold as best he could, and he spent the night huddled against that canyon wall. By the time the sun rose the next morning, he was exhausted. He obviously didn't sleep since he was standing straight up the entire night. I mean, he couldn't even sit down, right? And he knew that he was going to be there for at least another day unless, someone miraculously figured out that he was missing and a rescue team was dispatched, which they didn't, obviously, and they weren't. And so Aron, being an engineer, came up with one quick solution to his standing problem. He rigged his harness to suspend himself and take the weight off of his legs, essentially creating a seat. And this allowed him to kind of lean back. Even though he could only do this in 20-minute intervals because of how the harness reduced blood flow to his legs, this was still a win, right? I mean, certainly his first win since this situation started. The next few days went kind of like this for Aron. A few tiny wins as he figured out how to survive and keep his odds of rescue above 0%, but mostly a lot of pain and hopelessness. He continued to chip away at the boulder and to try to pry his arm free, but his efforts were always fruitless. The burritos and the chocolate that he had taken with him obviously didn't last very long. His water supply, though carefully rationed, was diminishing fast. And the long days and the cold nights were starting to cause him not only physical stress, but severe mental stress. I mean, can you imagine this? The only thing that he had that wasn't a total bummer for Aron was his camcorder, which he used to document his experience, tell stories, and even leave messages for his loved ones. I don't know how much this helped, but it at least kept him a little bit entertained. But towards the end of day 4, we're now 96 hours stuck at this point, and no sign of a rescue team. Aron looked at his arm, and a new fear entered his mind. His arm was quickly losing circulation. I mean, it wasn't just swelling, it was turning black and becoming a source of intense, throbbing agony. The tissue was dying, and he knew what that meant. Infection. Infection was now a looming threat, and with it came the potential for sepsis and even death, which it's not like starvation or dehydration are pleasant ways to go either, but from my limited knowledge, sepsis is probably worse. The canyons, which used to be this place of comfort and soul searching for Aron throughout his life, had now essentially become his tomb. And so he recorded a final video message on his camcorder to say goodbye to his family and acknowledge the love that he had for all of them. I mean, you gotta remember, he had spent most of his time stuck here thinking about them and about, of course, his own life. Things like what he had accomplished, his regrets. I'm sure he thought about that avalanche, the 14ers that he wouldn't be able to climb now, and I'm sure he thought about his friends and those former friends who he had kind of fallen out with. I mean, would they even care if he died? Should he have let someone know that he was leaving? Why was there no one out there searching for him? All these questions are running through his head. During some moments, he even considered ending his own life, before he met an even worse and more painful end. I mean, this was all just too much. But instead of his brain staying on all of those thoughts long term, delirium ended up kicking in. A combination of little water and food, total exhaustion, and of course the relentless pain of his arm. Well, all of this stuff combined, and Aron started to hallucinate. One of these hallucinations was particularly powerful. Aron had this vision of a little boy. Not just any little boy, by the way, but a child who he felt was his future son. And in this moment, a switch kind of flipped inside of his head. He realized that the hallucination was of a future that he desperately wanted to live to see. Maybe this was the kind of thinking that Aron's former friends had been wanting him to arrive at in order to take less risks in his life. This hallucination, this vision could not have come at a better time, because now Aron's mind was fighting for survival despite the fact that his body was failing him. By the end of day 5, the situation was beyond dire. His water was now completely gone, and so he was drinking his own urine, which is generally a bad idea, not just because it's gross, but because I guess it could potentially poison your liver. I don't know, don't do that. His arm, of course, was just dead weight at this point. It was decomposing, and it was likely already infected. He was hypothermic after spending 5 nights braving the elements with no warm gear. He knew with absolute certainty that he was going to die in that canyon within just a day or two if he didn't do something drastic. All attempts to free himself from the boulder had failed. He had tried every conventional option, but there was still one more option that he had not tried yet. And again, I think you know where I'm going with this. Do you remember that little unimaginable idea I mentioned earlier? The one that Aron thought was too brutal and too bloody and frankly out of the question back on day 1? Well, that thought, which had been kind of flickering in and out of his mind since the beginning, kind of solidified in this moment. And Aron realized that the only way he was going to survive was amputation. And again, he had been thinking about this a little bit, about like how he would do it. He had been kind of testing the knife against his skin, but now he knew that it was the only chance he had. With no sign of a rescue team, he was gonna have to get himself out of this canyon. And so he thought about it some more, and eventually he knew what needed to be done, and he knew how he was gonna do it. But the act itself, I mean, I don't think anyone is going to be prepared for that. So I don't always do this. Maybe I should more often. Maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. But I'm going to give you a warning now. I'm going to prepare all of you for a few minutes of this story that I'm sure will go down as the most painful of Aron's life. And I feel like now is the right time to tell you that this next part also happens to be the climax of the scene of the movie that I've been telling you about this guy, which, if you haven't guessed by now, is none other than 127 Hours. Now, this movie scene literally caused people to pass out in their seats due to just how brutal it is. And so my version is not going to be as grotesque as that, but there's no easy way to say this. It's going to be a little graphic. Okay, you've been warned. So Aron assessed his tools, and his best option was the small blade on his multi-tool knife, which he sharpened on a nearby rock. But folks, that was the simple part. The rest of this was essentially going to be a very painful engineering problem, because he needed to figure out a way to not only cut through his arm at the right angle, breaking the nerves and the tissue, but he also needed to figure out how to get through the bone. And so just before he started breaking skin, he realized that the knife was going to be too dull to break into the bone and the thick muscles, in his arm. And this next moment, this huge decision, is where Aron's story goes beyond a mere survival tale and becomes a testament to the absolute limits of human endurance. His little knife had no chance of cutting through literal bone, right? And so he was gonna have to do that part himself. He created a vise using the wall of the canyon, and he actually tried to break the bones of his forearm. And I mean, this is just crazy, right? Can you imagine like purposely bending your arm so far back that your bones shattered? I mean, theoretically, this would hurt a little bit less for Aron because, his nerves were already dead in that area, and he had lost a lot of blood flow to his hand and his forearm, but that theory of it being less painful proved to not be true. This was absolutely excruciating for Aron. I mean, muscle tearing, nerves tearing, until finally Aron heard 2 snaps as his forearm folded. He sighed, and then he strangely smiled. And he smiled because, in a sick, twisted way, this was actually the first step towards his freedom. But it wasn't over yet. Now that his forearm bones were pre-sliced, we'll say, Aron's knife would be able to do the rest of the work. He began the process of self-amputation. He started to cut through all of his muscles, his tendons, his nerves. And every time he got through one, by the way, it felt like he was being electrocuted. He tried to like disassociate from this experience, pretending like he was slicing up some animal that wasn't him. He stayed focused on the task, his mind fixed on one goal, which was to escape. I'm going over this relatively quickly, but folks, this took him over an hour. Over an hour of this unimaginable pain. I mean, I don't even need to describe it anymore. He was getting methodical about things, and eventually he even put the knife away and switched to his multi-tool pliers and severed the final thick nerves and tendons. He clenched those pliers, and suddenly his body fell backwards, and he kind of like looked up, and he saw that his right arm was still attached to the rock, which is brutal. But after over 5 days of being trapped in this moment, Aron was free. The immediate aftermath was a flood of relief, but that was quickly followed by panic. And that's because Aron had to get out of that canyon quickly and get some real medical help, obviously. He tied up his wound using his camelback tube from his hydration pack, and he began hiking through the narrows of the canyon, trying to go towards the sunlight that he saw. Just as he thought that he had made it through a pocket of open air, he kind of looked down, and disaster, folks. A 65-foot rock face was standing between him and the ground. Now, this, to me, is where Aron's lifelong dedication to the outdoors and his skills and abilities really came into play, because very few people could have survived what Aron already had up to this point, and I don't know anyone on Earth, certainly not myself, who could then, after going through all of that, rappel down a 65-foot sheer rock face with one arm while the other one was actively bleeding out. That's insane, right? But it was his only option. And so, with his arm in a makeshift tourniquet and actively losing blood, still severely dehydrated and weakened from basically no food for 5 days, Aron threw his rope down and started getting himself down this cliff. He used his new stump, for lack of a better words, to kind of keep himself balanced, and he used his other arm to slowly rappel down. His feet were literally shaking every time they hit the face of the cliff, you know, since his legs were basically jelly at this point, but somehow they kept him stable, and he trusted his harness and the ropes. I feel like the term locked in is something that a lot of people say right now. You know, like I've been playing a lot of pickleball recently, and I'm always like, all right, I got to lock in for this serve. This is basically like a brand new definition of locked in. I mean, Aron was locked in. There's no denying that. I don't want to see any comments saying that he wasn't. And somehow, some way, he ended up reaching the ground. And when he looked up at what he had just conquered, I'm sure at this moment, he probably felt like a badass, and deservingly so. So Aron made it down this cliff, but he still had many miles of terrain to cover before he could get help. And so he kind of stumbled through Blue John Canyon, just praying that he would see someone, anyone, right? Anyone who could possibly help him. But after over an hour of wandering, the clock was ticking, right? This was in the middle of the day, and so the sun was blaring, and once again, just in case you forgot, Aron was severely dehydrated, losing a lot of blood, and now his vision was starting to get blurry. He was having to take a ton of breaks just to rest, just to gather up enough strength to continue, and so now he was starting to worry that he wasn't moving fast enough to get to the main road. And of course, this is when a new awful thought began to enter his mind. Was he going through all of this, cutting his arm off, surviving barely for 5 days out there, just to die after escaping from that boulder? He's thinking about this, he's reflecting on his life once again, and he was getting ready to give up, frankly. Not mentally, but physically. He just couldn't go on. And all of a sudden, he sees 3 figures out in the distance. Aron started screaming for help, just in case those figures happened to be people. He wasn't even really sure. And sure enough, this family of 3 from the Netherlands, who were probably very confused, ran up to Aron and offered him some water. Aron was able to get a few words out about what happened. The family obviously saw him bleeding a lot, but instead of freaking out, the family leaped into action, and they helped him get into their truck, and they drove him to a main road. As Aron kind of floated in and out of consciousness in this car, he heard the sounds of air being cut through by giant blades. But he wasn't hallucinating this time. It turns out that his friends from Aspen, who were concerned that they hadn't heard from him in a few days, had in fact alerted the authorities that he was missing, and helicopters have been dispatched to the area in order to try to find him. Aron's rescuers, this family, flagged down the helicopter, and Aron was airlifted to a hospital in Grand Junction, Colorado. He may have been in critical condition, but he was still alive. I mean, isn't that just insane? They were actually able to stabilize him at the hospital, and that's when his recovery began. It was brutal. You know, physically, he had to heal from the amputation and all the trauma to his entire system. Mentally, he had to process what the hell had just happened, the near-death experience, multiple surgeries, prosthetics. And once all that was done, he had to process, you know, adapting to life with only one hand. On Aron's 28th birthday, he would end up returning to Blue John Canyon with a present that he had been given. That was the ashes of his right arm, which had been recovered from the boulder and ultimately cremated. Instead of keeping these ashes as a testament to his survival, Aron would go on to spread the ashes in the area around where he was trapped, which he feels is where the ashes belong. Now, when all of this came out, the world, and I literally mean the world, was captivated by Aron's story. His memoir, which was called Between a Rock and a Hard Place, which I'll link below, was published in 2004. It became a bestseller, and rightfully so. It's an amazing book, and I'd recommend you guys read it. One more time, click that link. The book actually goes into a lot of details of other wilderness stories that Aron encountered before this particular incident, including the Avalanche story that I told you about. And folks, Aron's story doesn't end with his rescue and his recovery from this incident. He continued to pursue his love for the outdoors, climbing, hiking, skiing. You know, he became the first person to ascend all of Colorado's 14ers solo in the winter. And while continuing to do more badass outdoor stuff, Aron became an advocate for wilderness safety, emphasizing the importance of telling someone your plans before you leave, and of course, carrying the proper gear. And then, as we all know, in 2010, the movie 127 Hours came out, which tells a pretty thrilling version of Aron's story. And you know, this is a movie, and so of course the directors and producers took some creative liberties, we'll say, but Aron approved of this, and he was even at the premiere of the movie. Apparently, Aron even allowed the director of the movie, which was also the star of the movie, James Franco, to watch all of the tapes that he recorded while he was stuck in Blue John Canyon. Oh, and do you remember the hallucination that Aron had while he was in the canyon? The one that inspired him to fight for his life, the one with that little boy? Well, the same year that the movie came out, 2010, is really when the best part of Aron's story happened. He had a son, and a few years later, he had a daughter. At this point, Aron's about to turn 50, and is living out his dream of being a father, a dream that was born out of one of the most gruesome, death-defying situations of all time. It's such a privilege to be able to tell you guys these stories. It's so much fun, and it's just a blessing, man. And so if you watched all the way to the end of this video and you like my channel, if you've seen other videos, please consider subscribing so we can maybe get to 1 million subscribers this year. What am I saying? That's the goal, 1 million subscribers this year. I would appreciate your help in getting there so much, and I just appreciate you watching to the end of the video. And so now that you've hit the subscribe button, maybe you want to watch this video next. This is the one YouTube seems to think you'll like the most, and so give it a try, and just thank you. Thank you for watching this, thank you for being here, and I will see all of you in the next video.